Everyone to the Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to you all. I think in first instance, I'll just mention and remind members and officers that the meeting will be webcast. So if you're going to speak, then please use the microphone. I'm going to rearrange the agenda a little bit so that people, officers, and Councillor Ross and the Finance Director, so we can bring those early on in the agenda, so you can get off if you so wish. Everybody's welcome to stay if they wish to. So item 1 on the agenda is attendances. Do we have any apologies?
Apologies have been received from Councillor Denise Weston.
Thank you. Is there any others? No. Minutes of the previous meeting, they were to follow papers. Can we agree them as a correct record? Yeah. Pretty happy.
Yep.
Item 3 is declaration of interest. Do we have any? No. Okay. So this is where I will change the agenda. We'll take item 11, which is response to the budget scrutiny. And I know Councillor Ross is here, and if I can find my papers. Oh, here it is. So we've got it before us on item 11. Has everybody got that? Yeah. It was to follow papers. We get a bit mixed up, actually, if you've got hard copies. So this is a response, really, from the executive. I don't know whether you want to speak on it, Councillor Ross.
I will briefly, Chair. Thank you very much for your invitation to tonight's scrutiny, and thank you for bringing this forward to the start of the meeting. Appreciate, as I said at the Budget Council, I appreciate the report that you put through to the executive, and on behalf of the executive, I hope you approve of our responses. They're largely around your requests for information and training, which I think were very important, particularly with regards to the investment management strategy and information on reserves. I note that my colleague, the exec member for adult social care, has been to a scrutiny meeting recently, and hopefully that will build up a long-term relationship there with regards to the concerns that were mentioned. There was one other thing that you wanted to have information on, which is the demand-led services. Now, just to note with that, they are regularly brought to the attention of the executive in the public executive papers, and they do go to the Accounts and Audit Committee for review as well. So it's really for Council to think about whether you wish them to remain in that kind of relationship, or whether you wish to take that responsibility from Accounts and Audit and have it at a scrutiny level instead, looking over the outturn reports that we do have. Obviously, that's probably a conversation for elsewhere, but yeah, I just thought I'd mention that there's information in those papers on a regular basis. And I'm very happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I think in terms of that last point, I think it would be useful for the scrutiny, because I think it helps us to really, because obviously the demand-led budgets are the crucial ones in many respects in terms of how we balance our budget. So for us as a scrutiny committee, having those, some regular sort of update to see where we are clearly on the needs-led budget would be helpful in terms of us coming up to the following year's budget scrutiny process. I mean, I don't really want to duplicate that goes everywhere else, but if it's fairly simple to do, I think it would be the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with your logic there. If it's the scrutiny that's doing the budget consultation side of stuff, then really it does make sense for scrutiny to be looking at the demand-led budgets as they go through the year.
Okay, is there any other comments? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. All I was just going to reflect on was that when you do read through the report, a lot of remarks in the executive response column on pages 19 onwards just seem to say the executive note this position. And whilst I appreciate, that for the purposes of report, that's what you're going to receive, it would be, given that this committee only meets quarterly, I think welcome if we could get a bit of a timescale brought forward for when we're going to, for instance, receive additional information, receive training opportunities, and receive a more robust response, really. And I'd obviously defer that through to you, but I just felt that at times it felt a little bit light touch, the response there. So, thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly the budget needed to actually happen, which it did. And that was, later on in February, and we're in March, the first meeting in March. So what I'm going to suggest is that, whoever the committee, because obviously the committees can change and the chairs can change, but I would recommend that the information and training on some of these items we do almost immediately, or the first job that we do, and they can be built into the work program. So that's what I'm going to suggest. And so, but I do take your point, Aidan. I think time just flies. You're in the process of the budget. You know that better than us. But yeah, and I think what was apparent through the budget process, particularly around investment management and some of the council reserves, that there were a lot of questions that came out of the budget scrutiny, and I think more and more with particularly the investment management strategy, more and more is happening in regard to that, and I think we need as scrutiny members to have a real handle on how it all works and how we mitigate against risks and so on, and understand some of the detail of the investments, because it can be complicated in some respects. So I think that needs to be done quite quickly, because I'm not convinced that all members across the council understand this. So I think it should probably be open to all members, and I think there is a lot of learning to be had, because if we're going to scrutinize it, then we need to understand it as well. Yeah. Okay, so any other questions? No? Well, can I thank you for coming? I think that's it now.
Anytime, Chair. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Right, if we move on to item 6, which is the CRM system and an update on that. And thank you for the report. And I'd be grateful if you could just go through some of the report findings.
Thank you, Chair.
Right.
Yeah. You doing it?
No. I was just about to say that wasn't me.
Sorry.
So what are you doing then?
TROs.
Oh, TROs, yes, sorry. Yeah. Right.
Too many acronyms.
Yeah.
Yes. So in terms of the CRM report, this is a matter which had previously been considered by the Scrutiny Committee, particularly in the light of a number of problems that we were having with regards to the implementation and the rollout of that particular contract. And it has been a very tortuous process. And you'll see from the report that there were originally, flowing from the task and finish group back in January 18, there were 3 recommendations at that stage. Recommendation 1 has been followed up on. completely. Recommendation 2 is a standing recommendation, effectively, because that applies to the position that the council will adopt in looking at future large ICT contracts. And really, it should apply to most types of contracts, but it was around reviewing the way in which we approach these. And the third recommendation there was really just that a further report would come back to you, because really so that you could be confident that all the items that were outstanding were being dealt with. So there was an update in October 2018. There's been quite a gap. And part of the reason for that is because we've been working largely it was a very difficult thing, because part of the problems and the reasons for the delay were because of difficulties around getting the interface with the AMI contract and sort of getting things in place. We also had a period where we were in some dispute with Civica, who'd taken over the contract from the original providers. And so we were working through those things in a way to try to secure the delivery of the outstanding items under the contract. So we're now at a position where everything has either gone live or is due to go live within the next month. So, but other than registrars, and the reason that the registrars is taking a bit longer is because part of what we were able to secure agreement with Civica around was that we actually upgraded the provision around registrars. So the arrangement under the original contract specification would only have provided for effectively a diary management system for the registrar's service. This provides us with a full case management and other sort of support for that service. So it's a much better system than we would have had. It wasn't available under this original contract. We had to get them to provide it from a different arm of Civica, effectively, and no additional cost as well. So, although it has been delayed, we've actually finally got there. Although I think I'm being told now that CRMs are things of the past, and we're now moving on to the next thing in terms of ICT delivery. But that's the way of the world, isn't it? But we are now in a position where we've, as I say, gone live with most of these things, and I think Sarah Curran has been doing training sessions for members where they've wanted it around how the CRM system can be used by them. As you can see there, we've got a considerable number of customer accounts that have been set up. It has had a really good impact in terms of reducing the number of calls in certain areas, which was part of the rationale behind it, which is obviously give us more time by freeing up our time to deal with more sort of complex complaints. And it's also there because it provides greater information to residents around the whole of their engagement with the council. So on the whole, it's been a positive experience. But say, I think I'm guessing that we will be on to the next cycle in terms of customer engagement pretty soon. Okay.
Are there any questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think the C360 system is a great idea. Have everything in the same place is great. And people do like to be able to do things online and report things through the same system. And I know it helps with all of the data collection. But one thing that we always come across as ward councillors is system's great. It allows us to stick things in this end, fine. What can happen is nothing comes out of the other end. Now, this report is about the functionality of the system, isn't it? So how I would use it to submit a complaint or a blue badge application or something such. What is the confidence levels that if we stick it in this end, something is going to come out of the other end? As ward councillors, what we see all the time is, and I had one last week. It was about the bins where they reported the same issue 5 times through the C360 system. They'd raised it as a complaint. Nothing happened until I got involved as the ward councillor. So what's the level of confidence that actually it will do what it's supposed to do? Not the functionality of the system. I'm sure that works okay. Does it produce the right outcome?
I don't know. I don't know whether that's a general problem or whether that relates specifically to issues with AMI-related matters, because I know that there have been some problems there in that things have been reported and then they're closed down as having been completed when they're not actually completed. And that's something that we've been working with AMI on. I think if there are specific examples of situations where you're not getting some resolution on these, then if you could provide me with some examples, then I can take those up with Sarah, and we'll look at it. Sarah Curran will look at it through the customer services area, because I'm not aware of specific complaints. Is it happening in every case, are you saying, or?
The residents have completely lost faith in the C360 system, because the general feedback is if we report it by a C360, a lot of it is to do with the AMI contract. It is to do with potholes and trees and such like. They have little confidence in it because nothing happens until they involve ward councillors. And I'm sure if I ask my colleagues scattered around the table, they have exactly the same feedback.
I don't think that's necessarily a system issue. I will take it up with Sarah Curran to ensure that there aren't some issues there that we're missing. I think that if they are the types of issues, potholes, etc., then it's likely to be an ongoing issue that we have. And again, what we're asking is that if you bring this to our attention, if you're not getting the responses, because these are areas where there are KPIs in the contract. There are sort of measures that we can take, we can look at. If they're failing to do these things, we can look at whether it's appropriate to apply deductions in respect of it. So if there is a failure to respond to complaints within the timescales, we need to know about it so that we can look at it. And that's a sort of fairly consistent message that we've been putting out to members. Tell us where this is happening, and then we can follow it up and review it to see whether it is something which is effectively not in line with what they should be doing under the contract.
And we flag it via either Chris Morris's team or flag it through the executive member. We flag it through there. I think my concern, there are concerns about the specifics, and I can send you a couple of examples. And I'm sure all of us around this table can send you multiple examples of where nothing happened. Concern is really around the perceived effectiveness of the system. Because if I asked people in Davy Hume East to use C360 system to book a blue badge, I can hear what they're going to say now is we use it to try and get a pothole, so nothing happens. How can we have confidence in the system to do that? And it's that sort of question really, is how do we get residents confidence to be able to use these systems? At least if they ring somebody up and they speak to somebody, I think they feel quite confident. And I'll finish now by saying I think it's the right way to go, definitely. But I think there's a piece around confidence in the system to be done.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose actually Councillor Winstanley said much of what I was going to talk about. I think we all appreciate the distinction between the systems issues and the contracting issues and the resource issue, but ultimately I think if you're a resident, all you see is a service failure. And I think as a committee, we really now, given that we've done our piece of work on AMI and the AMI contracts, and given that we've asked the questions around the implementation of C360, I think really now we need to reflect on where we go with this, because we're a long time in now with this operating model, and it's still just routinely churning out service failure. And I just worry that we'll get to a point with residents where they have absolutely no confidence in our ability to even fix a street light, if you know what I mean. So I don't know if there's the opportunity for us to think about whether or not there's more that we can do. But certainly, I think the message has been sent out to the executive very clearly about our assessment of where we're at, and it would be nice to see a bit more progress being made, really. But if other members have anything to add, then refer to them.
Seems to me if the question's being asked through the system, somebody's got to answer it. It seems simple to me, but I don't know why. Yeah, Councillor Newcross.
Well, I'd like to echo those comments. I'd also like to say that, I mean, okay, it gathers the data, but it's clunky. Using it is clunky. The outputs, I mean, you know, for people that we log a lot of these complaints ourselves, we get so-and-so, your problem with road pavement or right-of-way, your request number is delayed. And then, right, okay, I've logged about 100 of those. Right, let's go and look which one that might be. It's not really that great for that. And I would love to have an app. I'd love to walk around my ward with an app and click, photograph, done. That's not available to me either. So there are some things that really would help, apart from having responses that actually were on time and maybe a little bit more personal to the actual request. That's an Amy thing, or whatever service happens to be provided thing. Thank you.
Chair. Well, again, just to echo some of the comments that have been made, and Jane, you know that I've raised issues in another place. Oh, yes. I'm just wondering whether, you know, in terms of going forward, there needs to be some sort of statistics behind this, doesn't there? Really, because if we're saying that, well, we've got, you know, we've got these failures in the system, and you know, your response, Jane, is, well, tell me about them. That would suggest to me that we maybe haven't got the quantum of the problem. I mean, I used to think it was just me that couldn't use the system at one point, but I'm now beginning to think I may have some company. And Councillor Newgosh's comment is interesting about the app, because I was talking to, and I was having demonstrated to me from a colleague that there is an app that is available, and he was busy, you know, doing a picture of a pothole and sending it off. So what access he's got, I've no idea. But clearly there might be some inconsistencies here in terms of our understanding of the system or its capabilities are. I don't know. So suggests to me that there needs to be, you know, some evidence sort of gathered, if you like, in terms of how we're finding the system, and certainly the logging of the occasions when it's just not working at all.
Come back on that. I think the quantum does exist, because certainly since I became a councillor last May, one thing, and I know all of the new councillors do it, we are religious in making sure, even though we don't trust the system, we log the stuff in the system, and you'll be able to see there how much of this stuff is it has gone beyond what it's supposed to go beyond. So that quantum does exist. What you may not be able to find is the stuff where the system has told you it's been done when in fact it hasn't. Because I personally, whenever I'm told, unless I've got one of the officers on site with me, if the system tells me it's been done, I go and check. Because unless I go and physically check, I cannot guarantee it's been done. And that goes from potholes being fixed to bulbs being replaced in street lamps. You cannot. It's just not trustworthy at the moment. So I don't wish to bang on about this, because I'm sure the functionality is great. I love the idea of the app, by the way.
Well, I think obviously what's been raised is really important. I think it does undermine the council and councillors in terms of the work that is done. So I would suggest that we get some kind of report to Scrutiny. Clearly, it would be difficult to do it before May. So soon after May, really, if we could get a detailed response from what has been said tonight, would be very, very helpful, I think. Yes, John.
Thanks, Chair. Can I add a slightly different view on this? love it. But you have to bear in mind, I wrote my first computer system in 1973. Nothing is clunky, as far as I'm concerned. Stuff that we had to work with in those days, and until comparatively recently, was awful. I as an elderly gentleman, can drive C360 beautifully. It works for me. That mapping system for locating where the issue is super. And sometimes, and I have to say it is sometimes, the request doesn't quite get filled the way we'd like it to do. But most of the time it does. And if it doesn't, you've got a very easy way of going back into the system. So there are shortcomings. The shortcomings, I believe, are in the delivery of the services, not the delivery of the CRM or the C360. And that's wonderful. I don't want to download music on my phone when I'm looking at potholes. I want to report where they are. And that is a little bit beyond my capabilities, I'm afraid. But please take the message that in general, at least in one little bit of the borough, C360 is working rather well.
Well, it's nice to hear that it's working for you. But it doesn't seem to be working for everybody. So I think, of course, everybody could be doing it wrong. And you're the only one who's doing it right. So, so we'll learn something, I think, if we get that report and that update to see that clearly it's not working for everybody. Yeah, Councillor
I was just going to add that I think you and I were both at the same meeting the other night with the executive. Executive member for finance talked about service modernisation and a modernisation programme being forthcoming and actually being an extremely important piece of work for the council. And I think really there's a huge opportunity there for us to fix the problems C360. And I just think it would be welcome if we could be perhaps involved in that process, and it maybe not even shaping it, just at least hearing about the work as it develops, if possible. It could be sent back to the executive. Thank you.
Yeah. As I say, I think we can quite happily bring a report back. I think it will throw up this distinction between what are issues around the functionality of the system and what are issues with regard to the way it is being run by the people that should be receiving the complaints. And around the modernisation work, there is a significant element that is around digital. It is a very important aspect of what the council needs to do going forward. And as I said, there is an element, an extent to which this is already out of date, and so it will form part of a wider review generally around how we perhaps engage differently digitally going forwards as well. So it's not something which is being preserved in aspic. It is something which we will continue to review, and it is important that we do end up with something that works for everybody ultimately.
Yeah. So we're happy with that. That's how we'll move forward. Thanks, Jane. Right, now if we go to now the PROs, I'll get it right now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon Walls. For those people who've probably never met me before, you may have had emails maybe in the past. I work for the One Trafford Partnership client team, so I work with Trafford. I've got some colleagues here from Amy, though, who have substantially written this report on my behalf because they are technically the people who deliver TROs at Amy. So I'm going to actually pass over to my colleagues to run through that report and give you some information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Sharon, my name's Keith Harris. I'm a senior engineer in the One Trafford Partnership, and part of the role is to deliver traffic regulation orders. So the report that you've received should outline the process that we use to consider the introduction of traffic regulation orders across Trafford, and it also outlines the legislative process and the matrix that we use to determine the priorities, and I'll cover what that matrix means further on. So to start with, what is a traffic regulation order? Well, legally, the highway is for the passage of road users, and there's no formal right to actually park or wait on the highway. But clearly, for many years, it has been permitted by local authorities across the country, and that shouldn't be at the expense of traffic flows or safety. So there are measures that we can take, as you appreciate, to actually limit or restrict or manage where traffic parks on the highway. They are the traffic regulation orders that we're talking about today are used for controlling certain movements along the highway. There are others rather that do control certain movements, just no entries, one-ways, etc. But what we're predominantly talking about tonight are the permanent parking or waiting restrictions. So the yellow lines, single yellow lines, and double yellow lines, and the curb markings, which restrict loading and unloading as well. So the traffic regulations we have to introduce under what's called a Traffic Regulation Act 1984. So that's a national standard, and there's a process that we have to follow in order to introduce the orders, and that's governed by, and forgive me for the technical terms, the Local Authorities Traffic Orders Procedure, England and Wales Regulations 1996. So that's a statute that's set out by law that we need to follow. That stipulates the steps that we must take, which includes the consultation, and that's with affected frontages, predominantly residents and businesses, clearly. Also public bodies such as emergency services, fire, police, HGV bodies, taxi bodies, etc. But also, crucially, a wider public engagement process with an advertisement in the newspaper and a 21-day notice where anybody can object or even support, if they wish, a traffic order that's been advertised. So these steps can be quite protracted. As you can imagine, if people do object to an order for whatever reason, then we have to consider that, and it can go to the executive member to consider those objections fairly. So regrettably, the council doesn't have enough resources to deal with all the requests that we receive, and at the moment, you'll see from the appendix, there are 271 requests on the list that we maintain to determine where requests are coming from. So, common to most other local authorities, we have in place a prioritisation process, and that provides what is a fair and a consistent means of deciding which requests should go forwards the consultation process and then ultimately implementation if agreement is made. So you'll see from the appendix right at the end of appendix 6, there are a range of factors in that matrix which each request is scored against. While this may not be a perfect process, it does ensure that there is a straightforward approach to assessing individual requests, and it does set out a framework that allows us to not only prioritise the request but also then respond to the residents or the councillors or whoever it is that's asked for a particular restriction to be put in. So the operation of the matrix is also relatively straightforward and allows new requests to be considered alongside those that are already on the list. So each time a request comes in, it's given a score following that strategic sort of framework that we provide. And then at the beginning of it, and that then allows us to see what score that achieves and what priority it achieves at that moment in time. Clearly, we can't introduce, when I say clearly, we can't introduce new schemes kind of on an ad hoc basis, because every year we have a funding budget to introduce traffic regulation orders. And once a scheme is in the process of being introduced, it's quite, it would be unfair to stop that process and revert to another one. So obviously we are bound by the number of requests we have and the funding available, the resources, the time to actually introduce them. So every year, at the beginning of the financial year, so around about this time, what we do is we run or we update the matrix to determine the priority order schemes in there that are not already going through the process. And then the higher priority schemes are then assessed in greater detail to see merit of it, consider, going through a consultation process to introduce restriction. because even the higher scoring ones may be other reasons why it wouldn't be appropriate, or maybe they're going to be part of another programme of works or another budget setting. So we make that kind of, we undertake that detailed investigation at the beginning of each financial year, determine which programmes, which new schemes go forwards. Schemes can go up and down the list, because you'd probably expect as new ones come in, if they have factors that actually make them more deserving of attention than somewhere else, and that's the way it has to be, really. Somebody has to sort of, there has to be an ordering system in process. So in terms of what's actually going, the report sets out in paragraph 5, I won't go through in detail which schemes are currently going through the process, and they are itemised in the appendix 2, 3 and 4, the schemes that are ongoing at the moment. I think probably said enough with that details there. Open to questions, but I think the message or the information I'm trying to get out there is there are a large number of requests. It will be a continuous number of requests as the amount of traffic on our roads, fortunately, is as it is. It's the same everywhere. We have a process in place to prioritise and to manage those requests. And we're always open to suggestions if members could think of any improvements or any other ways of changing that process. But at the moment, that's been in place for 2 or 3 years, my understanding. And we are seeing a throughput of schemes through there. We'd all like to do more. I'm sure you'd agree with that. But given the resources, this is the method that we're using to those priorities into place.
Are there any questions? Yeah, Rose.
Thank you for that. I was just wondering, the objection stage of the process, is that weighted? How does that work if there's a lot of residents object to it? What's the kind of process where a TRO would be taken out because of the objections, maybe? And also, is there a criteria whereby the roadworks are spread around the borough? Could it be that sometimes one area gets all the roadworks because of the matrix, or is there some scheme way of spreading around the area?
Okay. So the first part, in terms of objections, it is a process. It's a case by case basis. In essence, really depends on how many objections are received and what strength they have, whether they're frivolous or quite serious in their nature, and in consideration of what the alternatives could be as well. So, there are instances where we get lots of objections to where there is no kind of alternative other than to say, okay, we won't continue with that project. Clearly, the community does not support the proposals, therefore it will be taken not put into place. Or there might be an alternative. There might be a way of dampening down or reducing the length of lines or putting them in different places, etc., that will actually overcome a portion of those objections. So that it has to be a case by case basis. In terms of an area-wide approach, at the moment we don't split the borough into areas and say, right, we'll have a portion for Stretford, a portion for Sale, etc. It is purely based on the process that prioritises by the factors in Figure 6. It would be quite challenging to allocate by the areas, because you might find that you then are not targeting most meritorious site, where you get real instances or continuous instances of obstruction or road safety issues. So, that's given the size of the borough and the size of the budget. I think at the moment that's the process that we put in place. That it just looks everywhere consistently.
I may miss this, and I apologise for this question if I have. Excellent list of outstanding orders. Where in our system can we see the background application, perhaps the paperwork for those individual orders? Is there a way, is there a part of the system that we as councillors get to, which will show us that background, or would we just have to put in a request?
There is no sort of public-facing area where we keep the requests. So I think it's probably sort of on balance. If you had interest in a particular request, provide you with that information. If you know, it's quite resourceful to try and parcel out bits that we think we can get out quickly, or even to councillors, for instance. But at the moment, we don't have that system to have in place to provide that level of detail. Yeah, it would be on request, certainly. Yeah.
Councillor Newcroft.
Thank you. Can I just check? I mean, I am quite shocked how many there are here, and you're covering about 10 a year, so 27 years worth, even if there's not a single one comes in again. Can I just check, firstly, there's no way off this list apart from actually getting a project done. You could languish at the end of the list forever if
you ask the questions and I'll
okay. and it's coming straight up my head. I'm very glad it's on a merit-based system. What was the final thing? I mean, let you pass you back to that while I just try and remember what the third point.
Sure. I mean, it is a very, very good question, a very interesting question, because it's something we do think when we respond to the public, we have to be very careful what we're saying, because we don't want to raise expectations that, okay, you're on the list. That sounds like, wow, yeah, I'm on the list, but actually number 239 or something, and that generally means that you're right. There is not a lot of scope that they would suddenly jump up the list to number 1 or number 2. So we do try to be careful how we respond to residents and councillors in terms of where they are in the order. But having said that, it is nice to keep that list, because it allows us to be able to do that response maybe quite quickly in some cases if they're on the list, and we don't have to go through that prioritisation process again, which could duplicate work and spend time on reassessing a site that's already on the list, that we could perhaps just take 5 minutes to just check the figures to make sure it's still where it is on the list. If we scrapped everything after, say, number 20 or something, then we wouldn't have that ability to do that quick check. But yes, you're right.
My follow-up question was about expectations, and the first question was because I put a TRO in 2 years ago and it ain't on the list. Maybe it was before this list was created. And I get that if another few more requests come in, I've looked at the point scoring, you add points if over 10 people. So I think it's about advising people where they might be on the list and the likelihood, because my first request was, we'll look at this, this might be covered in 6 to 9 months or perhaps longer 2 years ago. So I get now I'm looking at it, why, but it may never get covered. But I think that might be something that the public might like to know. That yes, we've got your thing. Yes, it's there. But the chance of, or the number on the list is, or the scoring is, maybe. I don't know what you think on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're exactly right there, Councillor. And when I respond, I do try to say that your score is, I don't know, 7, 6. We're actually dealing with schemes that score in the high 70s, or the priority. Sometimes people do come back and ask another follow-up question. And I'm quite happy to say, actually, you're number 200 on the list of 271. Give them that, manage that expectation, as you rightly say.
Thank you, Chair. Is there a limit below which you don't need I've forgotten the acronym, TRO?
TRO.
Thank you. And the reason I asked the question is I can think of very specific examples around M41 where there are yellow lines in existence already. They don't go far enough away from the corner of the road, and specifically around drop pavements. There's loads of drop pavement on M41 where the drop pavement is maybe 2 meters away from the end of the road and the double yellow finishes at 1 meter. So something like that, surely the enforcement process is already in place because the double yellow goes part way down the road. So to get those double yellows extended by another metre, would you need to go through this process, or do you just need to go get somebody out with a pot of paint and go and paint the road?
Unfortunately, it's the former, not the latter. We do have to go through the process again because the actual traffic order specifies the length of the restrictions, and we could be challenged if we try to enforce anything different to that order. The public would be able to challenge that in the court, and might have to give back lots of fines if the fines were dished out and it's not correctly signed.
So the way to get that to jump up the list is to, and I can't read all the, I didn't look at this online, I looked it on the piece of paper. I can't see all the bits which will make it jump up the list, nor can I see which, is there a weighting against each of the parameters in the decision support sheet? Is there a weighting against each of them?
So if you mean if there's an area where it would seem to be beneficial to extend.
Yeah, so if you look down all the various categories, then there's the subcategories in column 2, and they're the things that you're measuring against. They're going to generate points and make it jump up and down the list. Are they weighted in there somewhere?
The weight in terms of the points range, if you see the third column, it says points range. So for each, I don't like talking about accidents or collisions, but for each accident, you would score, if you had more than one fatality, which is rare, I'm not, you would get 5 points for each. So if you had 10 slight accidents, you'd get 30 points. So there is a weighting within those particular bands. Yeah, sure.
Thank you for time, Chair. It's essentially a few variables which we score with. Each variable is subdivided to provide a score depending on the severity of that variable.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I look at number 9, if we specifically dealing with parking, where residents are complaining about non-residents parking on their road, one of the things that we look at is the duration of that parking. So, if it's all day parking by non-residents, that scores a lot higher than if it's parking by non-residents for a short period.
Understand.
That's exactly how the whole matrix is structured, basically. So again, we look at collision statistics in the area. So again, those are broken down into fatal collisions, serious collisions, and slight collisions. Again, when we're looking at collisions, we're not looking at the actual collision. It's actually the injury accident record that we look at. So you get situations or locations where there's a few fender benders, but there's actually no one gets injured. That would not be recorded on there. And again, this is not just a Trafford standard; it's a Greater Manchester standard. And the information that we get with respect to collisions comes from Greater Manchester Police. So they themselves only deal with injury accidents. That's what they record.
Okay.
So if there is no injury, basically that's not going to be recorded.
So I understand the principle and you've answered my question that unfortunately there is no lower limit or below which you can say we just don't paint a double yellow line on there. So the follow-up question then is, because as you'll hear when I speak later in this meeting, I'm doing an awful lot of work on the Equalities Act within local government. And on that particular occasion, if the top pavement is blocked by a car and somebody with limited mobility can no longer get access to the pavement. So where in the matrix do the issues under the Equalities Act fit in? Where are they in there somewhere? I guess item 3
item 6. If you look down at item 6, covers that point, councillor.
I can't. What did it say?
It's problems with disabled access. It's all basically, or junction visibility, or cul-de-sac access point. So if you've got a cul-de-sac where it's your only means of entrance to a road, that would get the points. If there's a problem with disability access. What I'll just caveat with one snippet, I suppose. The regulations very restrictive in terms of that we can't just protect private drives. This is obviously a lot of resident complaints is people parking across drives or partially across drives. What we're not able to do is, and you know, the resources is actually the issue there, that we can't deal with those by simply going through the process to put yellow lines across a private drive or an access to a business, unless it's part of a more wider public scheme, so a junction protection that legitimately be extended to cover a private drive or an access, or it forms part of a road that's got a lot of accesses, public roads, etc. So
yeah, what I'm talking about specifically is public roads where you go up and down pavements.
Yes.
From what you've just said, on the basis of this matrix, those small changes to double yellow lines are never going to happen. Are they? They're never going to reach the top of the list.
To extend them, if there were none there to start with, which is what we call junction protection, that really enforces what the highway code already says, that you shouldn't park within 25 metres of a junction. So you kind of say nobody should be objecting to those through the TRO process, because the police could effectively put people there anyway, still put them down because that enforces that highway code. So they score because they are often a safety or an access, a congestion type issue, because you've got particularly where buses can't get around things properly, or as you rightly say, disabled people can't cross.
This is the bit which I'm struggling with, and I may just be not understanding what you're saying, to be honest. But from what you've said that there is no way these issues are ever going to get done. They're never going to get to the top of the list.
Well, which particular issue?
I'm talking about extending the double yellow lines across the drop pavement.
Around a junction, so go beyond the junction to a drop curve.
Yes.
It would be considered if it was an existing scheme and it was requested, it would be put into the matrix. I can understand what you're saying, that it wouldn't score.
It's never going to generate
unless
points.
It's got some of the other factors that have come about, accidents, unfortunately, or the kind of third-party funding, or it's now bus routes, or there are ways that it could get higher scores. But you're right,
it's not going to happen. So, which then leads on to the follow-up question: how do we change the matrix so that things like that do reach the top? Because I can see there's a cost element on here. I assume the lower the cost is going to be an inverse proportion. If it's a low cost and easy to do, therefore it'll jump to the top of the TRO, I would guess.
That's right, yeah.
It's a not question to answer this question now. But maybe it's a question we could have as part of the minutes from this meeting.
I mean,
it's just that it's an element.
Really welcome these comments, because they do help.
No, it's not a criticism. It's me trying to understand the process. But when you've got residents who are saying we cannot process up the street because all we need is a yellow line extended by a metre, and I go back to them and say, well, actually, we can't do it because we've got this really complicated system and it'll never get to the top of the list. It doesn't seem to make any sense. That's all.
Thank you.
Apart from changing the matrix itself, do you offer any sort of service for councillors who have, maybe they've got a village that has a severe problem on many junctions? Do you offer guidance on whether it should be a junction by junction application or a group of applications? Because I do.
To be you, that councillor.
It doesn't have to be me personally or my village personally. Generally,
I would say the best approach is to provide us with the information what the problem is, and we'll kind of consider what the solution is. If that doesn't sound too crass, I think you're right. It might be that it's a series, or it might be that there's one. It just depends on getting on a case by case basis. But yeah, if you set out exactly what the issue is, we can then assess it accordingly.
Okay. Just for myself, because I get frustrated by the fact that sometimes when I've complained about a dangerous bend or whatever, and I know that a lot of accidents have happened. Problem is, not everybody reports them, and if they don't report them, it doesn't get logged. So it is a flaw in the system, but I don't know how you overcome it. But it does frustrate the life out of me. I've just got one, in my ward where it's an bend, and I know it's dangerous. Every time I go down it, I know it's dangerous, and I know that we've had loads of complaints and petitions and everything, and there has been quite a lot of accidents. But when they look at the detail of the accident, it doesn't show up. They never ever reported. So it's a frustration, and I don't know how you would overcome that, but I'll just tell you that because it was frustrating me all the way through the meeting. But I think just a question around how we compare with other authorities in terms of this matrix. Do we look at other authorities and look at how maybe they can improve the matrix? Do they have big, long waiting lists like we have? It'd be interesting just to be able to compare that question. And do we look at different matrices across different areas to see whether we are fitting into the kind of norm, or we stick out like a sore thumb because we're not doing something. I think that would be a useful exercise as well.
Okay, just anecdotally, I could say I've relatively recently joined the One Trafford Partnership, so I have experience of all the local authorities, Staffordshire and Wigan, for instance. And yes, they do have long lists.
Yeah.
Obviously, the bigger counties tend to have even longer lists than ourselves, the nature of the issue. And in terms of the matrix, I obviously have no input into the compilation of this, but it is a slightly more comprehensive than some of the previous ones I have seen, as well, in terms of the number of factors in the matrix. Some can be just purely, are there any accidents there, and how many requests have been and things like that. But this does have other sort of problem issues in there to address the fact that it isn't just about accidents, it can be about congestion or other amenity issues. So try and take away the fact that it's just you have to wait for an accident to happen. You can get higher scoring sites in this matrix without the collisions recorded for the injury accidents in there because of the depth of the matrix that we've got. So from a kind of an outsider coming in, seeing it from a different perspective, we do acknowledge that there could be improvements made, and certainly we will keep looking at that. And if you do, yeah, no, agree.
Yeah, I mean, what are we saying then in terms of how we, involve ourselves with this? Are we saying that we want to look at different matrices and different elements of it, just to see where it takes us?
I'm just going to reflect, Chair, that it struck me that, as I understand it, the only reason this is on to committee was at the request of Councillor Boys, and he's not on the committee anymore.
No, I realise.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with this, and anecdotally, I have to say, I think the service that's offered to residents, whilst it can be slow when it's done, I think it's quite good. I've been involved in consultations on church fields in Bucklow Ward, and I have to say, I think residents received a good service there. I don't have any particularly strongly felt view on this, but I appreciate the work that Councillor Winstanley's done in respect of disability access in the borough. So if you wanted to look to benchmark or to see if there's other areas of best practice that we could perhaps learn from, that could be something that could be done. But as personally, I feel it is relatively robust, and I feel reassured by what's been presented to committee tonight.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Chair, there's an issue listening to the discussion this evening. There's an issue that's come out, and that is, those items which are never going to see the light of day, if you like. So, and in terms of managing expectations of those residents who contact us, and we've all got a number of these smaller schemes which we know are of concern to local residents, but maybe not hitting the the 200 and something in the list. And I think there needs to be some sort of appraisal which suggests, look, actually these schemes aren't going to see light of day, or we're talking about realistically, we're talking about 5, 6 years down the line, or whatever it is. I think that would be useful to know that, because that will fashion the way we respond then to constituents. And the other thing that just occurred to me was I don't know when the criteria was developed for the matrix, because I'd certainly agree with colleagues that clearly it helps to prioritise, and essentially we'll always have to do that. But I don't know when the criteria was established, and whether there are circumstances that change, which maybe cause us to think about, is the criteria that's used, is it still relevant? And if we were to tweak it appropriately, would it actually make a difference and actually reorder some of those, reorder some of those jobs on that rather long list?
If I may just say, prior to the One Trafford partnership coming into existence, where Trafford Council used to operate in terms of traffic engineering, was by way of having 3 separate engineers for the north, middle, and south of the borough. Again, obviously, they were very knowledgeable guys in terms of knowing the borough, etc., etc. However, the issue that came about was the issue of consistency in terms of how schemes were being promoted and were being put in, which is why we've ended up coming up with the matrix. Matrix has only been in existence since 2017, so it's a relatively new tool that we've in since the partnership was formed. So yeah. So I'd let you know.
I think whatever system, it should be a consistent system right across the borough, so it's fair to everybody. So I absolutely get that. I think, John.
This matrix is marvellous. I'm rather relieved that we haven't had it for a long time. Until I picked up this report, I'd never seen it. I intend to print that off and carry it around with me when I speak with residents who want restrictions, because it's an ideal tool for explaining just how the prioritisation works. You mentioned the possibility of changing it. If you do, can I please request that you circulate the new one so that we all know that it exists? As that will be a very, very valuable tool for us. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think everything's pleasing you tonight. I'm quite happy about that. Right. So I think most of us are happy with the matrix, and because I think there has to be a fair way of trying to analyse and get to a position where you can actually install a TRO. I think the question around disability is one that maybe you could look at and maybe come back to us and see if there's any opportunity to do that. Is everybody happy for us to do that? I think John's point about having the matrix is probably useful for all councillors to have. I don't know. I mean, is that something that we would like to recommend, that councillors are afforded that matrix? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. It's been very, very helpful and much appreciated. And I don't expect you to have to stay any longer, but you can if you wish. Right, we now go back to item 4. and that's questions from the public. And we actually have one, but it is about the ACM cladding, and it was a Mr. What was his name? Stevenson. And it will all. The reason he's not here is because we knew that THT were not coming tonight. We were told yesterday that they were not coming tonight. And the next item on the agenda is high-rise cladding. And so I thought that I'll read the question out. But the question really is to THT, but it's something that we can pass on. So question 1 from this gentleman was, during the last Scrutiny Committee meeting held on 15th of January 2020, it was stated that the reason THT had not acted sooner regarding the removal of ACM cladding on affected buildings was because they had been advised by Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service not to remove the cladding until it was being replaced, and that other organisations that had removed the cladding were criticised for doing so, as it actually made the situation worse. Item 5 of the minutes taken during last meeting, so that was in our minutes. If that is the case, can you please explain why the cladding on both Empress and Princess Court was removed during the summer of last year and has not yet been replaced, leaving both tower blocks exposed since? Clifford Court was also left partially stripped over winter and remains unfinished. And the second part of his question was, can you please provide some clarity and a definite time frame for which works will commence and be completed on both Grafton and Pickford Court, the 2 towers which have yet to be touched? What is causing the delay? And Alex wrote back just to say that that it had been recommended that following the question being raised, the most appropriate course of action is for you to defer the question to the next meeting of the committee so that THT can either answer the question in person or provide a written response to be given for the next committee meeting, given that they had previously indicated that they would attend each meeting in order to keep the committee updated as to the progress of their actions. I would expect them to ensure that they will be appropriately represented at the next meeting. So that's why he didn't come tonight, and it was, I think that's reasonable. I think what we should do, however, is to write to THT and inform them that this letter has been received and there are some valid questions that needs to be answered, and then obviously they should answer that letter, and then we can relay that to the gentleman, if that's okay. I will say we have received from THT, Sharon Davis, the PA to the Directors of Developer and Property Services. Sorry for the late note. Our comment for the scrutiny panel is as follows. Progress to remove the ACM panels at the Trafford towers continues. We are pleased to state that 3 towers have had all the affected ACM cladding removed and are shortly to commence the installation of the new cladding panels. We are awaiting a revised update from the contractor setting out the programme of works for the remaining 2 towers. Upon receipt, we will update the committee. The Trust has invested heavily in ensuring all of the customers live in a home that is fire safe. We are therefore pleased to advise that the Trust It's a first in the country to be accredited the new British Standards 9997 Fire Risk Management System. The sprinkler report was presented to Trafford Housing Trust at the beginning of the month. There were a number of questions raised by the board which require further clarification before the trust will agree to its installation. Ian Wallace will attend the next meeting and is sincerely sorry for not being able to attend this evening. So I think that's where we are. But I do think that we probably need to construct something to them that covers the points made by Mr. Stevenson, but also to get a bit more firmer in terms of the action that's been taken and firmer in terms of the date of completion and so on. I mean, it has been a difficult process. You know, we all know the difficulties that have happened since Grenfell, but we are, is it 3 years down the road now? And I know for a fact that there's a lot of testing on CRM and other cladding, and also on what is the best to provide cladding to provide for the future. And there's been a lot of to and froing, you know, backwards and forwards with the government in terms of that issue. But you know, for the residents, I think it's been a very uncertain time for them. But I do know when they've reported THT that a lot of measures have been put in place, like waking watches and all of those kind of issues, to try to keep people as safe as they possibly can until they've sorted out this cladding. So if we do that, then we'll, you know, we'll relay the answers to the members of the committee. That's okay. I don't know if there's any questions. Yeah.
Technical question, really. Would it be appropriate to share the content of that communication from THT with the correspondent who raised the question sooner rather than later?
Yeah, we will do that. Yeah, we'll put it all together into a format, including that. Yeah.
Thank you. Just going to suggest that I mentioned before that this committee obviously only meets quarterly. If we could perhaps receive an email update once you know that communication between THT and Mr. Stevenson's taken place, that would be appreciated. And the only thing I was just going to reflect on was that, you know, in 2.5 years now, I think this is the first time I've known a question to be submitted to a council committee through the process that was implemented some years ago. So I really welcome the fact that Mr. Stevenson's gotten in touch. You know, the committee knows how I feel about this issue. I've shied away from discussing it, and you know, my feelings remain the same. But I just hope that Mr. Stevenson and any other residents feel a sense of reassurance that we are interested in this and that we're not going to stop paying it any attention in the future. In essence, that's all I wanted to reflect. Thank you, Chair.
I think that's a good point. That we need to clear with Mr. Johnson that we have followed this through and include him in the responses. Yeah. Okay. Which is the Disability Access Task and Finish Group interim report, and Councillor Wyn Stanley, who is the chair of that Task and Finish Group, has provided a report for us tonight. So it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. You've got the full report in front of you. I'll just give you a quick summary. The point of this Task and Finish Group is to put disability access at the heart of everything that we do as a council. And from the work we've done so far, talking to people like the Manchester Disabled People's Access Group and the Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People, and if you look at the full list on in section 3 of all the people we've spoken to so far, and by our adopters a council of the social model of disability, meaning it's now incumbent on us all to remove barriers to access. I'm really confident that we can actually do what we set out to do. And so there'll be a much fuller report later in the year with a whole raft of recommendations. But at this stage, we've identified some things that we have to do now, hence this interim report, which, as it says on the first page, highlights immediate opportunities to influence improvements in disabled accessibility via the planning process. And they're in two parts. The first part is that at the moment there's widespread building and refurbishment of businesses and buildings taking place across Trafford. So now is the time to do something about this. And secondly, there are a couple of guides being written as we speak. One is a Trafford design guide and one is the urban development plan. And there's also some neighbourhood plans being written, such as the active Urbanism plan, which are being done currently. So now is the time to implement them. So section 4 gives the how we got to where we got to, but I'll just run through it now. So in very simple terms, for new developments, accessibility is required as part of building regs and is sort of reviewed as part of the planning process. For refurbs, though, building regs only require you to not make the situation any worse, and they're not really touched as part of the planning process. So planning permission can be granted, yet accessibility remains terrible. And if you walk around any of our town centres now, you'll see endless examples of refurbs where accessibility does remain very, very poor. But instead of relying solely on building regs, we use legislation like the Public Sector Equality Duty, which places a general duty on the council to eliminate unlawful discrimination, advance equality of opportunity and foster good relations. Then we can empower our planning team so that everything that comes before them has to be accessible for disabled people. Also, our hand is very much strengthened if the documents that we issue as a council, like the design guide, like the Trafford Urban Plan, include robust disability access design principles, because all these documents are referenced in the planning decision-making process. Hence, the 3 recommendations in the report is to ask the planning team to work with the governance team, Jane's team, to optimise the application of the Public Sector Equality Duty concerning disability access when granting planning permission, and specifically to answer the question, how can we make disabled accessibility a condition of every planning application which we grant? Also, for the planning team to make sure that the new Trafford design guide is robust in its consideration of accessible design principles, and also that the urban development plan and the neighbourhood plans also are robust in terms of accessibility. And in both of those cases, to go beyond building regulations. If we do this, it gives us a good start to making Trafford more accessible. So, as I say, this is only very much the first step in what I think is going to be a long journey. Any questions?
The recommendations in this report are admirable. I don't think anybody could have any objection to them, both inside the council or out. However, one nervousness that I have is I think it's the 3rd point, take my glasses off here, about making accessibility a requirement of granting planning permission. Have you looked at the implications of the law which would allow a developer of a substantial site to actually overturn that requirement on appeal? Or by making our position, I don't think we should not go ahead with that. I think we should be prepared, if it is possible, for a major developer to overturn a rather admirable decision on the basis of appeal.
I don't know if it helped, but it is something we've been doing quite a bit of work on with the planning team, because the public sector equality duty is something that isn't widely understood still across many councils in many respects, and its impact. And it's a duty to have regard to the impact. And it's also a balancing act in many circumstances, because it's not an absolute, not that you must promote accessibility or promote those things. It has to be part and parcel of an overall consideration. It is something that we're very conscious of, and in many instances, we had a matter that went to the planning committee only last week, where there was some concern around the extent to which there'd been consideration of the potential impact on persons with protected characteristics, in that they were providing a new property, and it was the extent to which they'd considered the implications for relocating people from an existing property into that new property. So it is being raised and it is being challenged. The area where there is an issue is around refurbs, because they don't require planning permission. Generally, they're being dealt with under permitted development rights. It is something that we're looking at. There is due to be a white paper on refurbs, which is due to come out very shortly, and we are hoping that that will introduce much greater controls, because at the moment we have many issues with refurbs, and it isn't just around the disability thing. And I think that there is a concern, though, that if that white paper falls short or is going to take a long time to come into play, we will look at whether or not there are other powers that we can use, such an Article 4 direction, which would remove permitted development rights for that type of conversion. So there are things that are being looked at. So, and I think it's right that we do continue to work in this area. It is really important that we do so. One thing I would caution against is just relying on inequality impact assessment, because I've seen many equality impact assessments across a range of things, and not just for this authority. And many people, there is a sort of commonly held view that if you complete your equality impact assessment, you've complied with your equality duty. And no, you haven't, particularly if it's just seen as a tick box. It's only the start of an assessment, and there's a much wider thing that needs to take place. And I think that what you have to remember at the end of the day, the duty sits with the decision maker. It doesn't sit with the person that writes the report either. So it's a really complex sort of set of circumstances. But I say, just in terms of the legal side of it, there is a lot of work that's going on. It is something, because the council has to have regard to the duty, it is something that has to be considered in connection with every planning application. But because of the fact that it is this balancing act, it will not always result in us being able to, or it being appropriate to impose specific conditions. But what we will do with the larger applications, equality is an aspect that will have to be considered by the developer and evidenced when they submit their application.
I think Jane's summed up the legal side of it really well. I think, we have a duty really to ensure that the Equality Act is followed. We've all signed up to it, and I believe that we should push the boundaries. At the end of the day, it's not our decision, but I think pushing those boundaries, the executive needs to understand that through the planning policies that are being developed, is that we need to, because we've all signed up to it, we need to actually begin to write all this into our policy documents, and that gives you a better chance of influencing, developers and everything else. So why it's an interim report is that if we don't do it now, it'll be well after the elections in May or June before we get another opportunity, and the policies might be completely written by then. So that is the reason of the kind of urgency of an interim report. I know we've been working in the task and finish group on other aspects of, developing a report for other areas of that Disability Equality Act that we've all signed up to, and that will come. And I think not least of those is just getting around this town hall and other buildings that we provide across the authority. So there is still plenty more to come in terms of the task and finish group. But I'd just like to say that Councillor Winstanley has done a fantastic job in relation to this. And I do pay tribute to him, and I know he's continuing to do that work. But I think getting this interim report tonight and getting us to agree to it, it can then go to Monday's executive meeting, because that will be the last one, where they can then consider this and hopefully instruct the planning design people and what other policies that may be being pursued at this moment in time. So are we all agreed with that? Thanks again. So we now go on to overview report. It's there before you. Is there any questions anybody wants to ask? No questions. Can we note that report? All right. And urgent business is just one other item, and that is scrutiny review. And we did put this on the follow papers. Basically, no, it's on here. Isn't it? Oh no, it's not. Yeah, we're doing a review of scrutiny, and I don't know where it is now. Where is it, Alex? It's 12, isn't it?
It's on the front of the second set of the same, which still says the scrutiny committee. It's item 12. It's at the bottom. It's just got a little table for a timetable. I can just bring this one over to you.
Oh yeah, I've got it now. Yeah. So the first part of that, and we've invited members, is for the council meeting next week on the 12th of March. There will be a meeting to discuss the scope, really, of the review. I think that's it, isn't it, Alex?
That piece isn't, I don't know if it's listed in that one.
Yeah, questionnaire sent to scrutiny committee members.
Yes, I think council's on the 18th.
Oh, is it?
I think so.
What day is it today? Oh, no, it is today, isn't it? Well, right.
Yes, what isn't listed on that one is that there is another meeting on the 18th, which is for the chairs and vice chairs.
Oh, is that for the chairs and vice chairs?
Of the scrutiny
I knew
committee.
I'd seen it somewhere.
Just to ask them to encourage members to come along, and also to cover the scope of the review,
right,
and if there's any major issues that they want to raise.
So the next date is the 21st of April, isn't it? Scrutiny review, it says.
Yes, that'll be the main meter, I suppose you'd say, of the review, which would be the meeting that everyone should have received an invite to, asking them to come and discuss scrutiny and what they would like to change.
I know. Yeah, it is during third of it, isn't it? I know it's not political in a sense, but wouldn't have thought so, really, no. But it's unusual for us to have meetings.
It's not. Is it a public meeting? It's not a public meeting, so I don't think there's an issue on the basis that it is just for members.
No. Yeah, so there is a table there. In June, an annual scrutiny report submitted to the scrutiny committee, and 22nd of July, annual scrutiny report presented to council. So that's the process, really. Right, with that, I'll close the meeting, and can I thank you all for your attendance and your contributions, and have a safe journey home.